Thanks, Alice, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It definitely is a pleasure to be here. I'd certainly like to start by welcoming you all here to South Australia and certainly to the information session this afternoon. It's good that you could all come along. I know that many of you are well along your journey in terms of job search. And we've certainly just got some very positive information from Michael here that will feed into that as well. But my topic today is strategies for localising your skills and experience. So what does that mean, I wondered? And I guess I'll cut to the chase and think about it from my point of view and the challenges that I see people facing. And in particular, I think the key barrier that a lot of people have come across with regards to job search here, not just in South Australia but all over, I think, Australia, is that one where employers feel that they need to take some preference around people who've already got experience either in the country or in that particular industry. I see some people nodding now. And it is a bit of a dilemma, actually. It's a bit of a, oh, sorry, I have to learn how to steer this thing. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Oh, we're really going. That's it, okay. So I think that many of you may have come across this sort of situation before, and I'm getting really down to a very practical level here, whereby advertised job vacancies often state that, you know, the ideal candidate will have, you know, at least some experience or relevant experience in this particular South Australian sector. I mean, it could be the Australian sector as well. And then when you drill down into the job description, for example, under the essential criteria, it actually says that you must have some relevant work experience in the sector. And that is a real challenge. And perhaps for those who get to an interview stage, there may be those interviews where, you know, you haven't had particular success, but you were really very impressive, and the feedback comes that, you know, keep going with the job search. It was really close, but on this occasion you've chosen somebody who has a little bit more experience than you have. I mean, the positive point about getting to an interview is that A, you know, you've been interesting to an employer, you've actually presented well, you've got your resume and cover letter through. You've been able to promote your skills and experience. And B, it's an opportunity to develop some rapport with that particular employer or organisation and ask them whether they've got any feedback for you around the experience that you could possibly get. So it is an interesting one, and we're going to talk about, I'm getting there, we're going to talk today about some of the tips and ideas I have for overcoming and accruing some of that experience, given that you're relatively new to the state. So it is a conundrum. That is a pretty tricky and complex situation to work through. And some of you may be able to give us some ideas as well. But I have a fairly basic response to it, and that is what I'd say are the 3 Ps. No, I'm getting there. So the first P is a plan, and having a plan in place is incredibly important. The next one is participating in your plan and in your strategies to move through that job search in a methodical way. And the last one, or the last 2, is having that persistence and patience, which I'm sure most of you do have. You could add another one, perspiration, to that as well, I think, in most cases. So before we, you know, think about strategies for accruing that work experience, what sort of plan can you put in place And I would always augur for some self-checking before you go about your job search. So the self-checking is in particular areas such as communication. I think communication is absolutely integral, to the way that you go about A, applying for jobs, and B, networking and having those conversations with people and forming those relationships and the rapport that you need in order to hear about the hidden job market, for example, that Michael alluded to. So we all know that when you come here, you come with a proficiency in English, a competency in English, and there's absolutely no question about that. But have you stopped to check with somebody around your, for example, pronunciation, enunciation? The way that you articulate in conversation is really, really important. And I'm generalising here. I know that many of you will have already received this sort of feedback. But there is a way of eliciting it and asking the direct question to somebody who's a professional and who's trusted, to say, do you understand me? Am I understood in my conversations? I'm applying for work here and I don't want to damage the chances of getting into the industry that I'm pursuing. And I think it's a very important area to think about. And there are things that you can do in order to increase that improvement in your English, for example. It doesn't have to take too long. We could look at things like conversational English, so just appointing a mentor, for example, to connect with you at certain times to talk about work and use terminology that's related to the industry you want to get into. There are lots of English language courses. For example, TAFE and adult community education centres offer informal opportunities for English improvement, particularly as it relates to work and the specific field that you're looking to get into. And the other one is obviously conversation at home. I'm sure that many of you do, but conversation around a dinner table at night, doesn't hurt, particularly for those who might have dependents, for example, that come home from school. And, putting that hour aside to intentionally check the way that, the words are rolling out. You might pick up a bit of slang as well, and that might not be appropriate for the workplace, of course, but I think that's a very important thing that you can be doing just to improve that level of communication. And I've already mentioned finding a mentor. Earlier, Alice talked about the service available through Immigration SA to look at your overseas qualifications and have them assessed. That also is very valuable for employers to understand at what level your knowledge is, albeit you will have studied a different curriculum, or slightly different anyway. I think being able to actually converse and talk to people about the fact that this is your level of qualification is critical, as well as having it in your cover letter or your resume as well. Local clearances, I think you and your specific occupational areas will be able to, or will have already checked into, the sort of clearances and certificates, licenses, for example, that you need to either attain now or put in progress. And so make sure that they're in order before you go out on your job search. The job search tools, I will just gloss over really. I think you've probably all got these in place. But these are critical, again, before you set out on that plan. The first one is the resume, of course, and making sure that terminology relates to the position or the job that you're applying for and your field of specialty. If you're not sure where you're going to get the feedback from, ask a recruitment consultant. or ask an employer where you're sitting down and having an interview. If you ask direct questions, i.e., can you tell me if the content in my resume actually expresses who I am and what my skills are, you'll get a direct answer. But if you just ask for general feedback, it's very often feedback that is very general as well. It's not specific and it's not that helpful to you. So ask those hard questions and be prepared to get the answers as well and do something about them. The other areas are well-written cover letters. Seek professional help again if required. I see a lot of cover letters that, while the conversational English is fantastic, no problem, the sentences aren't constructed properly, you know, and it doesn't give that great first impression to an employer. And you know what they say, the first impression is the lasting impression. Which is exactly why these things need to be in place before you go out into a very tight and competitive marketplace, because once you've made that impression, it's pretty hard to go back again after your English is great and you know your resume and your cover letter is brilliant. LinkedIn profiles and other ways of communicating through social media is also really quite key. Making sure that introduction about you is really reflective of your unique self and what you bring to a potential employer, because they'll always check your LinkedIn profile. Having a bit of a go on Twitter even, you know, around your industry, you know, it doesn't hurt. It raises your profile. And the last one is obviously interview skills and presentation at interview. I don't think anybody would have any issues around, you know, going along to an interview. We all know we have to get up for that, you know, specific hour. But there may be the way that recruiters interview these days and here that is unique to South Australia, and Connie and Cameron might be able to give you some ideas around that a bit later. But again, you know, we're looking at telephone interviews, for example, and other advancing technology with these sorts of, I guess, part or process in the application. And telephone interviews link back very strongly to communication, don't they? And having that good first impression here. And finally, developing that action plan, bringing it together now you've got everything in place. So having that self-checklist done, setting up a diary, setting up a journal, listing all the organisations within your field here in South Australia or wherever else you're conducting your job search is really important. Prioritising who they are and familiarising yourself with what they do also gives you that opportunity that when you're networking, which we'll talk about in a minute, you're able to converse easily, you know, with people in your field about other organisations working in that sector. All right, so that's pretty important. Registering with professional associations, I don't know who they all are, you know who yours is, but that again can be a helpful way of making great contacts and I guess linking in with other professionals that can give you that feedback. Identifying a professional mentor, that's, you know, if you ask people for help, if you ask them to give you a hand and give you some guidance, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to be ringing you every day or, you know, using your time up on a constant basis, then most people are more than happy to help if they're working in the industry, to give people who are new to this state a hand. And not just necessarily people who are from overseas, it's people who are moving here from this state as well, and people who are moving from one sector to another sector. They all come across this challenge of not having that experience as yet and having to go out and build it, find it. And then lastly, having a plan B. You've probably all got some backup plans, and you've got some ideas around, okay, these are my skills, these are my values and my strengths, these are other occupations. You saw the charts before that Michael put up. These are the other occupations that I could potentially look at as a part of my backup plan. And volunteer work that also is very relevant to what you're applying for. Got it right, I'm going in the right way now. So the second P is participation, so actively engaging in that plan and becoming culturally and socially familiar with other people from other walks of life, I guess, and specifically the local culture in South Australia. And I can talk more about that later. Learning about the local job markets, labour market, we've got some information this morning, this afternoon again. Retain that, look at it. Again, it's things that you can have conversations about. Networking, it's all about networking. It's finding the hidden jobs as well as the advertised jobs. And it's not networking as a business, it's obviously your self-marketing, okay? But using the networking techniques to self-market and promote yourself. And that can be a lot of fun if you do it really well. Social engagement, a lot of contacts in businesses are made through engaging in social activities. You know, maybe if you've got children that are attending school, you might go along to a school fete or to help on a clean-up day. Get involved. Think about some social and recreational activities you can do in groups. Your families, dependents, spouses, they'd all participate in this. And everywhere you go, you'll be looking to forge those relationships. Relationships that still need to be authentic and genuine, and they still need to be a two-way relationship. But that person that you clean up the schoolyard with would be the person that will give you the introduction to the person who employs you. So never missing an opportunity there. Community engagement, again, local councils are great connectors, forwarding people into the residential areas. Local MP offices, members of Parliament. I know a few people who down in the south of Adelaide do some volunteering and have introduced themselves to the local MP who has introduced them to other people as well. So it's a really good way of getting to know others in your environment. And extending yourself to look at, perhaps casual work while you're conducting your job search. Volunteering. I think yesterday I looked on Seek and there was over 100 volunteering opportunities, and gee, I'd like to do some of those. And in fact, we'll be following up on one. But there are all sorts of volunteering opportunities on there that don't require a lot of time, but wow, they can really connect you in and keep your skills up to date too, at least on the basis of them. So I think participating is really a key, to moving on and settling in. So I think that this is what I'm on about, networking. Sourcing local experience is really important. So getting back to strategies or ways that I think that you can be accruing work experience here in the state and using it as evidence to show a potential employer that you understand the local market. And so I'm just going to go back to say, I understand why employers, and I'm sure you do, look for that kind of experience, why they're preferring that perhaps. And, a lot of jobs are linked into things like compliance and Australian standards, might even be South Australian licensing law, regulations, etc. And I guess from an employer's perspective, you can see that, somebody who has evidence and has studied and has proof of this may be, someone they could use as an asset over someone who doesn't. So we need to circumnavigate this, or at least build your experience. So ask your network contacts, once you've established them, about work shadowing opportunities. Work shadowing is a bit of a non-threatening way of accruing that work experience. So it's a little bit more informal than work experience, where you need insurance cover, and a lot of employers are a little bit like, oh, that's a bit too tricky and a bit too formal. Hard. But work shadowing is basically, introducing yourself to an employer and asking them whether you come and spend a few hours talking to some of their key staff members about how they're conducting their, skills in the workplace, so that you can familiarise yourself with the way that they're doing it. And a lot of employers, if you're able to get through to the right people, are quite okay with this, right? Perhaps you may need an advocate to be able to introduce you in the first place to make that connection. You've at least come away with some referees and perhaps some ongoing contacts. The next one is employment interviews themselves. This is a great way of developing that rapport and asking people to, once you've got your feedback about the interview, asking them to give you some more contacts, or can I have an opportunity to, work here? It may be unpaid work to begin with. And you may be prepared to do that, but you may not be. But I think that that's a good opportunity. Where are we going now? So recruitment agencies, look, generally they're working, for the client and also the applicant, but the client being the employer. But recruitment agencies and consultants within them generally are happy to give you some information. Again, if you make those direct questions to them, they'll usually give you that feedback. But consider short-term contracts or temp work, within these confines, because recruitment agencies are quite often looking for people who are available immediately, who are committed, who are, I guess can indicate that they've got the skills to be able to carry out jobs. Sometimes they may be routine jobs. In an office situation, for example, they may not be exactly in line with what you're looking for, but be prepared to flex a little bit, be a little bit agile, and think about those, because they're great ways also of getting into the workplace. Work experience, I've already mentioned. You can purchase work experience from an insurance broker, which will cover you, and you can take that to an employer and say, I have the insurance cover to be able to, operate here, how about it? I'd probably suggest that you get the employer lined up first by saying, I can get the work experience, before you fork out, the financial requirement to purchase it. It's not that much though, so it might be worthwhile thinking about. The other is the volunteer opportunities I spoke of. So, they're quite diverse and they can draw on a lot of skills, and so, that's a really good one to consider. And accessing short courses that preferably are accredited through the Australian Qualifications Framework, but they will certainly start contributing to your profile and start building on your Australian contextual experience and knowledge. Okay, so short courses are really quite a good way to go. And the key outcomes of I guess getting involved in one or two of those points of basically getting relevant experience, whether it's paid or unpaid, it really doesn't matter. But the referee is really important. Having somebody credible, you know, global organisations are great to get into, obviously, because they bring the name with them. And having the skills and the evidence that you've actually applied them in the workplace where, of course, you know, this is what we're talking about. My belief is that there are ways around it, and that, you know, I've seen people I've worked with, people new to South Australia who have, yes, maybe taken a few months, but if they've got a strategy and they've put that into place, you know, they've been able to find what they're looking for without deviating too much or perhaps going to a plan B. So the persistence and patience, I don't think I need to talk to you about. I think everybody's self-efficacy is all intact here. But I think persisting and having patience means that it's not going to happen in 3 weeks. I spoke to somebody the other fortnight who, you know, was really appearing quite anxious and really needing some help. And I said, how long have you been here? Well, you know, 2 weeks. And I said, there needs to be some strategy around how you go about your job search. It may take a little while, but it will happen. So it can also take a lot of energy, create a lot of stress, so maintain a healthy balance. That goes with family members as well. Take time out in your plan to say, that's my job search, and this is, you know, what I'm going to do to keep myself healthy and maintain that good balance. That's really, really important. So a lot of people can, you know, that anxiety builds up. The desperation almost oozes out. And employers feel that, and you know, that enthusiasm can possibly be mistaken for a negative. So, you know, be very aware of that, take it carefully, and maintain optimism and stick to your plan. That's important as well. Remember, if plan A doesn't work, the alphabet has 25 more letters. You know, true. Be ready to be agile, and there are lots of other industries, I guess, yours isn't working out for you, that you can manoeuvre your skills into. Thank you. I think that's all I've got at the moment, but I'm very happy to obviously stick around afterwards and answer any questions that you might have. And I think